Sir VJ, the brother from the ancient mother. Once again, it's the Headspace, Africa's most poignant hip-hop podcast, where we focus on the growth, the evolution, and the history of hip-hop in this beautiful continent we call Africa. Now, I'm doing one of those beautiful anniversary reviews. This artist in particular is the cult figure of the Joburg Underground, the mysterious godfather of all things dark and occult, and basically one of the most influential rappers in South Africa, period. I'm talking about none other than the Hymphatic Thabs. Now, for viewers in other parts of Africa, this is basically a dude who embellished himself into the public imagination as part of an interesting rise in South Africa's television response to the culture of music videos and the rise of Channel O, which gave us a window into subcultures which were beginning to bubble up in the South African youth underground. And one of those things that we began to see in the country was the emergence of rap in the country. And a lot of these rappers who filtered through this time were rappers from Joburg who were basically conscripted into this kind of hip-hop which has gone under many guises. Many call it dungeon rap, some call it science fiction rap, some just call it science rap. Many have come to call it nerd rap, but I think generally it's come to be known as abstract rap. And the reason for that is it's rap for rap's sake. It's rap for the conceited, self-indulgent mode of the word. It's rap for the well-concerted, artistically inclined divestiture into literary arts through the medium of rapping. And as a result, Iapetus Records as a movement gave us Hymphatic Thabs kind of like as a forerunner and a face to that. You remember the baby-faced, hooded and turbaned, meek, scrawny rapper who was basically meditating in a room full of candles, rapping with a lisp about the secrets of the universe. Hymphatic Thabs was a weird figure who presented himself in a way that was extraterrestrial, and he kind of looked like one too, with his big marbled eyes and his mysterious demeanor matched with his slim physique. Hymphatic Thabs looked like he was straight out of a scary movie and a comic book. He was an illustration come to life, and his raps were that plus 1,000. They were South African reflection, they were African Renaissance, and most importantly, they were deep down esoteric spiritualism perceived through the mind and the body of a young man from Lesotho migrating into South Africa. Therefore, the interesting thing about Thabs is that he carries the universe in his pocket while delivering and giving us these deep dark secrets in a language which feels so undeniably African. Now, this is his second project which celebrates 20 years. Yeah, guys? 20 years. On 2000, listen up. The name of this project was Perfect Times, and I look back into it, and as I was listening to this project again for this review, I started to ask myself, what the fuck was Thabs really talking about? Like, why did he even name it Perfect Times? I mean, I get how his debut era was a direct like admonition and charge at society at large. But when I look at Perfect Times, I've been trying to decode what that actually even meant. And going into the deep, complex labyrinth of these songs, I have come to emerge with the idea that this is the project where Thabs alludes to the possible ideals of the inner soul. He's basically saying that there is no perfect world in time and space in and of itself, and that the only perfect time exists within the self. Perfection is within you, it's built and it's cultivated through pursuing what you love, and by doing it in a way that completely isolates yourself from all earthly, worldly distractions. And for him, I feel like this was rap, this was hip-hop. To Thabs, hip-hop is a sacrament. It's more than just a fucking genre or a culture. Hymphatic Thabs is like a student in the gardens of academia, and hip-hop is his Plato. He's basically a philosophical student of an art form which he regards as healing through words, as the transmutation of intellect, spirit, and soul through cadence, message, and code of language. And I think he delivers this in a way that is unapologetically complex. He doesn't give a fuck if you understand him or not. For him, this is solely about presenting his message through the prism of themes which stick out to him. Now, sonically, as it was with the Iapetus background of musical inspiration, this project comes from a place that is eerie and dark, and I think it was really a prototype of that sound back then. So a lot of it is like rudimentary clinking, clanking, metallic sounds that are kind of juxtaposed in this open, sparse, cold breeze that feels like air that is monotonously drifting through the infinite void. And to give you the honest truth, if you would zone out and deduct Thabs' lyrics from this project, it would sound like eerie, scary background noise. And it would sound like the kind of background noise in the kind of dripping suspense of a sci-fi movie. There's something that kind of beckons to a flash forwarding of some kind. And I feel like Perfect Times is also an allusion to when we find this perfecting modus operandi which kind of perfects our souls, then and only then can we move into a possible future. And I think it's this kind of futuristic spectrum which presents Thabs as something more than human. I mean, even his rapping, from his straight up metrically meticulous word salad which sets itself up in a way where you literally have to break it down and blend yourself into the whirlwind of Thabs' linguistic vortex to understand what he's saying. But he says it in a way that's just so rhythmically enchanting that at some point you're taken by the trance of the word sounds in and of themselves, the alliteration, how he sets up each and every bar to sound like the one before. Thabs is a perfectionist of rhythm, and I think it's something which indelibly stands out in the way that he raps. He uniquely carved out a unique style for himself that works in this way, that kind of takes these abridged motifs of word and repeats them while referring to different things in the visual landscape that he's painting out. Therefore, you hear and you feel a suggestion. It's never direct, it's always a hint to something more, something possible beyond what your visible, terrestrial, empirical senses can determine. Yes, it uses language, but what it is that it's an invitation to jump into something a little bit more spiritual. And if you're more tuned to that kind of hardcore literary style, you'll find yourself drawn into it. I would go as far as saying Hymphatic Thabs is South Africa's rap James Joyce, because he takes the complexity and he splatters it out in a way that is also kind of like a homage to the artist Jackson Pollock, who takes paint in and of itself, scatters it on the canvas, and it becomes its own creation. I think Thabs raps in between the accidental and the deliberate. His word choices are sometimes chosen, sometimes happen as a result of the sounds he's trying to make, but either way they paint a dynamic which becomes a picture. So I think the importance in Thabs' work is that it stands as a tome and a volume to just how deep South African poeticism has gone. I would connect Hymphatic Thabs to the long tradition of South African poetry, which stems all the way from people like Mafika Kwala, Risego Rampolokeng, Sandile Dikeni, Brawili Hositsile, Don Matera. Hymphatic Thabs is definitely the bridge between classical South African literature and poetry and modern day hip-hop. And I think that's an important thing that we haven't often spoken about, how rap as an art form connects to classical poetry, how Shakespeare has a direct relationship with Tupac Shakur, and how ultimately rap music is the only real living ancestor of poetry. And I think this project stands as a testament to that. You will only appreciate this if you're a student of the poetic art form. You'll see it as one of the living remnants of how poetry has expanded itself as an organism in different forms. And in this form, it takes on something that is Afrocentric, something that is futuristic, something that is esoteric, and something, because of all of these layers and volumes, attempts to go to the center of what life really is. So it's actually mysticism too. Hymphatic Thabs is also in the same realm as a Meister Eckhart or a Credo Mutwa. He's giving us secrets that we might appreciate if we understand his dialogue and channel of thinking. So ultimately, it stands as a legendary example of the tradition of living South African poetry. Now, the final verdict on this project 20 years later. 20 years later, it stands to reason that we haven't traveled far enough with this extension of poetry through rap, because at some point rappers became so dedicated to making rap for the purposes of pop culture consumption and reproduction that they left the poetic tradition to kind of become neglected in the aisles of academia, for it to die in some kind of boring slam poetry monotony. And I think this project is another remembrance of how we need to go back and find ways to reconnect with rap as living poetry. And I think there are MCs who are still doing this. Shout out to cats like Supambon. Shout out to cats like Willing Listeners Forum, who are rapping in ways which are savvy to the times but are pulling forth a direct link to poeticism and actual linguistic device, as they position themselves as more than just musicians of the voice. They are spoken word artists. So I think Thabs stands as one of the godfathers of South African modern day poetry, screaming, reminding the youth not to let go of the skill of articulating the soul. And I think he still says the only way, only place, only how we'll be able to find anything close to perfection is in our own hearts, in the knowledge of who we are, which is also a mystery, but in the delving deep into that. So it's kind of like an Inception style analysis of the soul. Ultimately, I have to say, for what it is, it still manages to become a 10 out of 10 for me. Sonically, it's completely redundant and it ignores everything when it comes to musicality, but I think that's the point. This stands as a testament to, I would go as far as saying, anti-music. This is not something, this is our music, folks. This is poetry. This is poetry that happens to be expressed through the backdrop of sound. And I think the sound that are used to accentuate this poetry are not anything that you are designed to dance to. It's literally a head trip. And for what it is, for a deliberate design of the mind and the head, it stands as a testament of the glory of what Thabs and the posse at Tha Hymphatic have come to build and are still building in this construct of super complex capitalistic rap that we now live in today. My name is Viwe, the brother from the ancient mother, and I'd like to thank all of the forebearers who have come to give us this beautiful climate of African rap that we're able to appreciate, and that people like me are able to critique and talk about, because we love it. This is The Headspace. Please subscribe.